120 million people brought into our country in the most failed societies on earth.
Somalia
Assalamu alaikum, broken news.
Tonight, we're connecting the dots. The National Guard ambush right outside the White House, President Trump's emergency address, Stephen Miller's warning, and what's happening in Minneapolis with the Somali migration takeover. This isn't 4 isolated stories. It's one big picture. Watch what happens when all 4 storylines collide.
Before Somali were Muslim, and Somali people that are real Muslims that are on their deen and on their way, peaceful. See, I'm an immigrant, but at the end of the day, this country welcomed me.
Salim then fell into hot water in South Dakota, where he was charged for murder.
So a lot of Somalis live here?
Yes. In fact, I think it's one of the largest populations in the cities.
We start with President Trump. This was emotional, serious, and straight to the point. Roll it.
This ambush-style attack just steps away from the White House. They'd been deputized as part of the most successful public safety and national security mission in the history of our nation's capital. The D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, which has achieved an unprecedented reduction in violent crime and crimes of all type. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, and an act of terror. It was a crime against our entire nation. It was a crime against humanity. The hearts of all Americans tonight are with those 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard and their families. The love of our entire country is pouring out for them, and we are lifting them up in our prayers. As we are filled with anguish and grief for those who were shot, we're also filled with righteous anger and ferocious resolve. As President of the United States, I am determined to ensure that the animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about. Nobody knew who was coming in. Nobody knew anything about it. His status was extended under legislation signed by President Biden, a disastrous president, the worst in the history of our country. This attack underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. The last administration let in 20 million unknown and unvetted foreigners from all over the world, from places that you don't want to even know about. No country can tolerate such a risk to our very survival. An example is Minnesota, where hundreds of thousands of Somalians are ripping off our country and ripping apart that once great state. Billions of dollars are lost, and gangs of Somalians come from a country that doesn't even have a government, no laws, no water, no military, no nothing. As their representatives in our country preach to us about our Constitution.
And this is where the story leaves D.C. and jumps straight to Minneapolis, because everything the president just warned about is already happening there.
50% of the people in this neighborhood speak Somali. How has it changed?
Just different immigrants.
So a lot of Somalis live here?
Yes. In fact, I think it's one of the largest populations in the cities. Yes, I think they do kind of stick to themselves, but I have a bunch of them that work under me, and they're pretty social. Some of the first ones came here, and I know it's a money issue, but they're walking around in sandals in the winter, and you're just going, oh my God.
Oh my goodness. No coat, no socks, no nothing. Not even a hoodie. Roll it!
There's several bars that used to have live music, the last of which just closed a few weeks ago. And the Somali East African people have been buying those buildings up for daycare centers, mosques, and various things. So the neighborhood's changed a lot, but I consider it an evolution.
This Omar Fateh, who's running for mayor, do you have an opinion on him?
Not a real positive one, but...
You like Jacob Fry?
Better than I like Omar.
And that right there sums up the tension in the city. The people living in it have seen the change firsthand, and they're not fooled. And the frustration isn't just local, it's national. Stephen Miller even sounded the alarm on X, stating, "What Earlys did in Minnesota is one of the greatest tragedies of recent history. And Minnesota is exactly where the next domino falls."
Right here is Minneapolis.
Ilhan Omar of Minnesota.
Dumbing of the United States has arrived.
The greatest domestic threat facing the United States comes from, quote, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race.
And he's not the only one talking like this. Roll it.
Our country should be more fearful of white men because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country.
Yeah, there is nothing more up than to completely pretend that his words have not been recorded. These people are foolish.
Attempting to revoke the status of about 700 Somalis in America under TPS, Trump is scapegoating a tiny piece of the population, some of the most vulnerable people in our country.
America welcomed us with open arms. Donald Trump's words and actions betray the core truth that we are a nation of immigrants and refugees.
You know, the Somali community really makes Minnesota better, and that isn't a matter of debate for us. We know it. Somali community is an integral part of our state, our culture, and our neighborhoods. Like so many immigrant communities before them, many Somalis came to Minnesota fleeing conflict, instability, famine, just looking to build better lives for themselves and their families like everybody else.
And while Minneapolis leaders are busy calling Americans the problem, actually, policy decisions are being made behind the scenes. And they're about to change everything.
We're not here by accident. We're here to stay forever.
On the contrary, not everyone agrees. Right after those comments were made, President Trump posted a message that's going viral. And it directly contradicts the idea that this situation is permanent. Trump wrote, "What our elites did in Minnesota is one of the greatest tragedies of recent history, and it's going to be reversed." He says the federal government is preparing to review every person brought here under the last 4 years, and anyone who does not love this country or contributes to it will be removed. And that brings us directly to what Kristi Noem announced, because Trump is not the only one that's looking at Minnesota. Kristi Noem confirms that Somalia's Temporary Protected Status, TPS, is under full review. The program began over 30 years ago, and for the first time in decades, it may not be renewed. Roll it.
TPS is a program that was always meant to be temporary. It's a program that is put in place, and I believe for Somalia over 30 years ago, and will need to be evaluated to make sure that it comes and is always implemented in the process for which it was intended.
And here's the part nobody in Minneapolis wants to talk about. Because once you say this out loud, the whole narrative collapses.
Federal prosecutors say Minnesota is grappling with one of the biggest welfare fraud waves in U.S. history. And now counterterrorism officials warn some of that money very likely ended up in the pockets of Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda-linked terror group operating out of Somalia.
Biggest funder of Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked terror group in Somalia, actually the Minnesota taxpayer? A federal investigator says yes.
Minnesota taxpayers have already lost billions to fraudulent daycare programs, fake food programs, money laundering rings, and shell nonprofits. And when former state fraud investigator Kirsha Magan, a Somalian American himself, said the quiet part out loud, the numbers matched the truth.
He confirmed nearly all defendants in the biggest fraud cases came from the Somali community.
And it didn't stop there, because the money didn't just vanish. Federal investigators traced millions overseas, some of it landing in the hands of groups like Al-Shabaab. Yes, a designated terrorist organization.
It was one of the biggest Medicaid fraud cases at the time. A group of men accused of stealing more than $9 million from the state's personal care assistance program. Among the defendants, Ali Elmi, the chair of the board at Kajog. And look at all the grant money I found the state kept sending Kajog after its chair was charged with fraud. The Department of Human Services sent the most, more than $600,000.
Let's start in Minnesota, and revelations that millions of dollars of taxpayer money stolen as part of a series of massive welfare fraud schemes may have been funneled to Somalia-based terror group Al-Shabaab.
The Department of Human Services appears to be asleep at the wheel.
We brought our findings to House Republican Isaac Schultz, who sits on the bipartisan fraud committee. What's your reaction to that?
That the left hand isn't talking to the right hand, and that State agencies, elected officials, and their offices are failing to communicate within state government to protect the public's dollars.
So when Trump talks about reviewing TPS and Stephen Miller sounds the alarm, when Kristi Noem questions a program that's been temporary for 33 years, it's not coming out of thin air.
They're not reacting to culture. They're reacting to crime. And to money quietly leaving Minnesota and ending up in places far more dangerous.
This isn't about fear. This is about facts. And the truth is, Minnesota isn't just changing. It's being exploited. And the people that are paying for it are the people that live there.